The morning coffee in the Galactic Council chambers had gone cold hours ago. 300 alien representatives from across known space sat in uncomfortable silence, their various breathing apparatuses creating a symphony of whirs and hisses that filled the massive dome. At the center of it all, a single human stood perfectly still in his military dress uniform. Commander Alex Reed looked ordinary enough. Average height, brown hair kept in regulation cut. The kind of face that would disappear in any crowd. What made the assembled delegates shift nervously in their seats was not what he wore, but what he did not wear. His uniform was completely bare. No ribbons, no medals, no decorations of any kind decorated his chest. For a man whose service record filled 17 digital volumes, this absence was more unsettling than any display of military might could have been. Admiral Torres stepped forward to address the council. She was an older woman, her own uniform heavy with the weight of 30 years of service and the medals that proved it. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had seen humanity rise from a single world to a major galactic power. "Honored delegates," she began, "you have asked why Commander Reed appears before you without his earned decorations. The answer requires understanding what happened 3 years ago, when Reed was just a young lieutenant with a spotless record and a dangerous habit of thinking outside the box." The Zephyrian delegate, a tall being with skin like polished silver, raised one of his 4 arms. "Admiral, our records show that Reed should be wearing 47 major decorations from 32 different worlds. Where are they?" Torres smiled grimly. "That is exactly the problem. Reed earned every single one of those medals through actions that, while technically following regulations, left chaos in their wake. The first incident happened during what should have been a routine diplomatic mission to the Alteran system. She activated a holographic display that showed a peaceful blue world orbiting a young star. The Alterans were new to space travel, cautious about contact with other species. Reed's ship, the Harmony, was there to establish formal diplomatic relations. Standard procedure, nothing that should have made headlines. The display shifted to show Reed as he was 3 years ago. Younger, eager, his uniform bearing only the basic service ribbons of a junior officer. Lieutenant Reed was serving as junior, diplomatic attaché. His job was to observe, learn, and follow orders. He was good at 2 of those things. A ripple of what might have been laughter passed through the alien audience, though with so many different species represented, it sounded more like a mechanical orchestra tuning up. The trouble started when the Harmony received a distress call from a civilian transport. Pirates had attacked a cargo ship carrying refugees from a mining colony. 10,000 civilians, including children, were trapped in damaged vessels while raiders circled like predators. The nearest military vessel was 6 hours away. Torres paused, letting the weight of those numbers sink in. 10,000 lives was not an abstract concept to any of the species present. Each had their own stories of loss, their own understanding of what such numbers meant in terms of families destroyed, futures cut short. Captain Williams followed protocol. As a diplomatic vessel, the Harmony was forbidden from engaging in military action. They were to maintain their position and continue monitoring the situation while sending all available data to the approaching rescue fleet. Reed watched 10,000 people prepare to die while following proper procedure. The Alteran representative, a being that looked like a cross between a tree and a jellyfish, shifted its translucent bulk. "What did the young human do?" "What humans do," Torres replied. He found a loophole. The holographic display showed the modest diplomatic cruiser Harmony. Compared to a military vessel, it looked like a cargo hauler. No visible weapons, minimal shields, designed for conversation rather than confrontation. Against 30 pirate vessels, it should have been target practice. Reed convinced Captain Williams that they could help without violating regulations. Technically, they were forbidden from engaging in combat. Nothing in the rules said they could not engage in deception. Torres activated another display showing the tactical situation. 30 pirate ships surrounded the damaged civilian transport like sharks around wounded prey. The pirates had spread out in a standard hunting formation, confident that no rescue was possible before they finished stripping the transport of anything valuable. Reed took control of the communications array. He began broadcasting false signals, creating the impression that the Harmony was not alone. He fabricated communications between imaginary fleet elements, complete with proper military codes that he had memorized from training exercises. To the pirates, it appeared that they had stumbled into the middle of a massive human naval operation. The display showed what the pirates would have seen on their sensors: multiple ship signatures appearing and disappearing, overlapping communications. Chatter suggesting dozens of vessels moving to surround them. The Harmony used its diplomatic transponder to mimic the signatures of ships that existed only in Reed's imagination. Within 20 minutes, Reed had convinced 30 pirate captains that they were facing overwhelming odds. When the Harmony opened communications and offered terms of surrender, the pirates accepted immediately. They believed they were negotiating with the flagship of a battle fleet, not a single diplomatic vessel. The silence in the council chamber was profound. Several delegates were reviewing their own tactical manuals, trying to understand how such a deception could have been successful. The rescue was flawless. All 10,000 civilians were saved without a shot being fired. The pirates were taken into custody by the arriving rescue fleet, who found 30 vessels sitting dead in space with their crews ready to surrender. Reed had ended a hostage crisis through pure audacity and creative interpretation of regulations. The Altaran delegate spoke again. This earned him honors? Torres nodded. The Altaran government awarded Reed their highest civilian decoration for saving their citizens. The Galactic Council added their own commendation for innovative problem-solving. His superiors were impressed enough to recommend him for accelerated promotion. She paused and looked directly at Reed, who had remained silent throughout the explanation. That should have been the end of it. A young officer makes good, saves lives, gets recognition for creative thinking. But word of Reed's methods spread. Other species began requesting him specifically for their impossible situations. They wanted the human who could make 30 pirates surrender to one ship. The delegates began to murmur among themselves. Torres could see the realization dawning on their faces. If Reed was standing before them without medals after earning decorations from 32 worlds, something had gone very wrong. What you see before you today is the result of 3 years of Reed being too good at his job. Every successful mission earned him more medals, more recognition, and more requests for help with impossible problems. But his methods also inspired others to try similar approaches. Young officers across multiple species began attempting their own versions of Reed-style solutions. The silence returned, heavier than before. Torres continued, her voice growing grave. The results were not always successful. 3 accidental wars, 17 diplomatic incidents, and 1 case where an entire star system had to be quarantined after a junior officer tried to convince hostile aliens that his ship was carrying a planet-killing virus. Reed's reputation had become a problem that threatened the stability of interspecies relations. She gestured toward Reed, who finally spoke for the first time since entering the chamber. His voice was calm, professional, without a trace of regret or apology. The last mission was supposed to be routine. The Proxima Rebellion had taken an entire star system hostage. Military analysts estimated that a conventional response would require a years-long siege to avoid civilian casualties. I was sent to assess the situation and provide recommendations. Reed's eyes met those of the various delegates. I ended the rebellion in 6 hours. The methods I used worked perfectly, but the consequences nearly triggered a galactic war. That is why I stand before you today without medals, not because I do not deserve them, but because wearing them would be more dangerous than any weapon humanity has ever created. The council chamber fell completely silent. Every delegate understood that they were about to hear a story that would change their understanding of both human nature and the delicate balance of power that kept the galaxy peaceful. Outside the dome, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of the species that had learned to travel between them. But inside the chamber, the future of interstellar relations hung on the words of one unremarkable human who had become the most feared officer in known space. 6 months after the Altaran rescue, Reed found himself assigned to the Outer Rim territories aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony. The ship had become something of a legend in diplomatic circles, though not for reasons that appeared in official reports. Captain Williams had learned to watch his junior officers carefully, especially Reed, who had developed an alarming talent for finding creative solutions to problems that weren't supposed to have solutions at all. The morning started normally. Enough. Reed was reviewing cultural briefings for their next assignment when the communication officer looked up from her console with confusion written across her face. Lieutenant Maria Santos had been with the diplomatic corps for 8 years and had seen her share of strange situations, but this was different. "Captain," she called across the bridge, "we're receiving multiple distress signals from the Kepler system. It sounds like chaos over there." Captain Williams, a man whose gray hair had been earned through 20 years of keeping diplomats alive in hostile territory, moved to her station. "What kind of distress signals?" "Everything, sir. Civilian transports, cargo haulers, even some passenger liners. They're all reporting attacks by raider fleets. The local defense force is requesting immediate assistance from any ships in the area." Reed looked up from his cultural studies. The Kepler system was supposed to be peaceful, a major trade route between 3 different species. Pirates rarely operated there because the traffic was too heavily monitored. For multiple raids to happen simultaneously suggested either very bold raiders or very desperate ones. Williams studied the tactical display that Santos had brought up. 17 different ships were broadcasting emergency signals across a region of space that spanned 2 light years. The local defense force consisted of 6 patrol craft, clearly insufficient to respond to attacks spread across such a wide area. How far are we from the nearest incident? 4 hours at maximum speed, sir. But by then, Williams nodded grimly. By then, most of the civilian ships would be destroyed or captured. The raiders knew exactly what they were doing, spreading their attacks to ensure that any rescue would arrive too late to save most of their victims. Reed stood up and approached the captain's station. "Sir, request permission to study the tactical situation." Williams looked at his young officer with the wariness of a man who had learned to recognize danger in all its forms. Reed's last creative solution had earned him a medal, and Williams a very uncomfortable conversation with their superiors about the proper limits of diplomatic immunity. "Reed, we're a diplomatic vessel. Our job is to observe and report, not to engage in military operations." "Yes, sir. I'm not suggesting we engage anyone. I just want to understand what's happening out there." Against his better judgment, Williams nodded. Reed had proven himself capable of seeing patterns that others missed. Maybe his analysis would help the arriving military forces plan a better response. Reed studied the display for several minutes, his brow furrowed in concentration. The attacks seemed random at first glance, but patterns began to emerge as he correlated the timing and positions of each incident. The raiders weren't just attacking randomly. They were being systematic about it. "Captain," Reed said slowly, "I think I know what they're doing." "Explain." "Look at the attack pattern. They're not just raiding for cargo. They're herding the civilian traffic toward specific areas. See how the attacks started at the edges of the system and are moving inward? They're driving all the civilian ships toward the center, where the most valuable targets are located." Williams studied the display and realized Reed was right. The attacks were designed to create panic and force civilian traffic into predictable escape routes, where larger raider fleets would be waiting. "It's like hunting animals," Santos observed. "Drive them into a trap where you can take them all at once." Reed nodded. "Which means the main raider fleet isn't spread out across the system. They're concentrated at the convergence points, waiting for the civilians to come to them." Williams could see where this was leading. "Reed, what are you thinking?" "The raiders are using our own assumptions against us. We see multiple attack sites and assume we need multiple response teams. But if we know where they're really going to be, we might not need a large fleet to stop them. We don't have a large fleet. We have one diplomatic cruiser with no weapons and strict orders not to engage in combat." Reed was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "Sir, technically we're not supposed to engage in combat, but are we forbidden from engaging in communication?" Williams felt a familiar chill run down his spine. "What kind of communication?" "The kind that might convince raiders that attacking civilian ships in this system was a very bad idea." An hour later, Reed was seated at the communications console with Lieutenant Santos, looking over his shoulder nervously. Captain Williams had authorized Reed's plan with the reluctant understanding that sometimes diplomatic solutions required creative interpretation of regulations. Reed had spent the hour studying the raider communication patterns. Like most pirate operations, they used encrypted channels but weren't particularly sophisticated about it. More importantly, they were coordinating their movements through a command ship that was broadcasting orders to the various raider groups. "Beginning transmission," Reed announced. He opened a channel on the raiders' command frequency, but instead of trying to communicate with them directly, he began broadcasting what appeared to be routine military communications between multiple human vessels. "Falcon leader to Falcon squadron. Maintain formation and prepare for hyperspace jump. Target coordinates confirmed." Santos stared at him. "Reed, we don't have a Falcon squadron." "The raiders don't know that," Reed replied, continuing his broadcast. "Hawk Squadron, report status on perimeter sweep. We need confirmation that all escape routes are covered before we begin the assault." On the tactical display, they could see the raider formations beginning to shift. The pirates were picking up Reed's transmissions and trying to locate the sources of the communications. Reed continued his performance, creating an elaborate fiction of multiple human battle groups. Converging on the Kepler system, he referenced squadrons that existed only in his imagination, tactical positions that were empty space, and weapon systems that were pure invention. "Wolfpack, begin electronic warfare protocols. I want all raider communications jammed in 30 minutes. Tiger Squadron, prepare for hyperspace interdiction field activation." The effect was immediate and dramatic. The raider attacks stopped as their commanders tried to understand what they were facing. Reed had created the impression that they had stumbled into the middle of a massive military operation, complete with specialized squadrons and advanced technology they had never heard of. 20 minutes into Reed's broadcast, the raiders began to withdraw. Their command ship sent increasingly desperate signals to their scattered forces, ordering them to disengage and retreat to rally points outside the system. "Phoenix Command to all raiders," came a transmission on the pirate frequency. "Abort current operations and withdraw immediately. We are facing unknown military assets with superior numbers and technology. All units return to base for reassessment." Reed smiled and opened a direct communication channel to the raider command ship. "Phoenix Command, this is diplomatic vessel Harmony. We are prepared to accept your surrender and guarantee safe passage for your crews if you power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded for processing." The silence that followed lasted nearly a minute. When the pirate commander finally responded, his voice was filled with confused anger. "Diplomatic vessel, you're not a battle fleet?" "Negative, Phoenix Command. We are a single diplomatic cruiser with no weapons and a crew of 47. However, we are operating in coordination with human naval forces who take a very dim view of attacks on civilian shipping." Reed paused, then added with perfect diplomatic formality, "We are authorized to negotiate terms of surrender on behalf of the approaching battle groups. Do you wish to discuss terms? Or shall we defer this conversation until our military assets arrive?" The pirate commander's response was immediate. "We surrender." 2 hours later, the approaching human naval forces found 43 pirate vessels, sitting motionless in space with their crews ready to be taken into custody. Not a single civilian ship had been lost, and the raiders had surrendered without a shot being fired. Captain Williams found Reed in the ship's small mess hall, calmly eating lunch and reading a book on xenobiology. Reed, we've been invited to the award ceremony on New Geneva Station next week. Apparently, the Kepler Trade Alliance wants to present you with their highest honor for civilian service. Reed looked up from his book. Just following standard diplomatic procedures, sir. Williams sat down across from him. Reed, what you did out there? It was brilliant, but it was also completely insane. What if the pirates had called your bluff? What if they had decided to attack us directly? Reed considered this seriously. Then we would have died, sir. But the civilian ships would have had time to escape while the raiders were dealing with us. Sometimes the choice isn't between good outcomes and bad outcomes. Sometimes it's between bad outcomes and worse outcomes. Williams nodded slowly. Reed's logic was sound, but it was also terrifying. The young officer was willing to gamble everything on his ability to convince enemies that reality was something other than what they could observe. It had worked twice, now, but Williams couldn't shake the feeling that such luck couldn't last forever. The Galactic Council is also sending representatives to the ceremony, Williams continued. They're calling it an innovative approach to conflict resolution. Reed returned to his book. Let's hope they still feel that way after the next mission. Williams felt that familiar chill again. Reed's tone suggested that he was already thinking about the next impossible situation, the next creative solution, that would push the boundaries of what diplomatic immunity could cover. The young officer had developed a reputation for making the impossible look routine, but Williams couldn't help wondering what would happen when Reed finally encountered a problem that couldn't be solved through clever communication and audacious bluffing. Outside the ship's small windows, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the small dramas of the species that had learned to travel between them. But aboard the Harmony, a pattern was being established that would eventually threaten the stability of the entire galaxy. Reed had discovered that with the right words and enough confidence, reality could be made to bend in remarkable ways. The question was not whether such methods would continue to work, but what would happen to the galaxy when they worked too well. The promotion ceremony aboard Earth Station Alpha should have been a quiet affair. Lieutenant Reed was receiving his new rank and assignment to the diplomatic cruiser Meridian, along with his growing collection of medals from grateful alien governments. Instead, the ceremony had become an impromptu conference, as representatives from 12 different species competed to request Reed's services for their most pressing crises. Admiral Foster watched the chaos from the observation deck, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Below her, alien diplomats were literally forming lines to speak with the newly promoted Lieutenant Commander Reed, each carrying data pads filled with problems that their own governments couldn't solve. "This is getting out of hand," she said to Captain Williams, who stood beside her looking like a man watching his favorite restaurant turn into a circus. "It started after the Kepler incident," Williams replied. "Word spread through the diplomatic channels that Reed could solve impossible problems without firing a shot. Every species in the sector started adding him to their request lists for crisis mediation." On the ceremonial floor below, Reed was speaking with Ambassador Thrix of the Centauran Republic. The ambassador, a being that resembled a cross between an octopus and a crystal formation, was gesturing excitedly with 3 of its appendages while explaining some crisis that required immediate attention. Foster checked her datapad. In the past 6 months, Reed has been requested for 17 different missions. Territorial disputes, trade conflicts, hostage situations, even a few cases that our intelligence people are classifying as impossible. What kind of impossible? The Vega Prime situation, for example. 2 species had been fighting over mining rights for a century. Conventional wisdom said it would take decades of negotiation to reach a settlement. Reed solved it in 3 days. Williams raised an eyebrow. How? Foster activated a holographic display showing the contested system. Reed convinced both species that they were fighting over the wrong thing, while they spent a century arguing about mining rights to a barely profitable asteroid field. A survey ship had discovered something much more valuable in a neighboring system that neither side had bothered to explore. So he negotiated a joint operation? Better than that, he convinced both sides that their century-long conflict had been engineered by a third party who wanted to keep them distracted while they exploited the real prize. Within hours, the former enemies were cooperating to investigate this supposed conspiracy. Williams stared at the display. Was there actually a conspiracy? No. Reed made the whole thing up, but by the time both sides realized they had been manipulated into cooperation, they had already established profitable joint mining operations and formal alliance agreements. Nobody wanted to go back to fighting. Below them, Reed had moved on to speaking with a delegation from the Rigel colonies. The colonists were all humanoid, but covered in scales that shifted color based on their emotional state. Currently, they were displaying the deep purple that indicated extreme agitation. The Rigel situation is even stranger, Foster continued. Three-way civil war between colonial factions, each side convinced that the others were planning to wipe them out. Military analysts estimated that intervention would require a full battle fleet and result in massive casualties. Let me guess. Reed solved it without firing a shot. Foster nodded. He challenged all three faction leaders to single combat. Williams blinked. He did what? Reed issued formal challenges to personal combat against all three leaders simultaneously. According to Rigel colonial law, such challenges take precedence over all other conflicts. The faction leaders were legally required to stop fighting each other until the challenges were resolved. How did Reed plan to fight three professional warriors at the same time? Foster smiled grimly. He didn't. He showed up to the combat arena wearing a standard maintenance exosuit covered in warning labels and radiation symbols. The suit was designed for working on reactor cores, so it looked like some kind of advanced combat armor. Reed just stood there in the arena, not moving, not speaking, just waiting. And the faction leaders took one look at what they thought was some kind of doomsday weapon and decided that maybe their differences weren't worth dying over. They requested mediation instead of combat. Reed spent 2 hours explaining basic conflict, resolution principles, and by the end of the day, they had signed a planetary peace treaty. Williams shook his head in amazement. What was Reed wearing under all those warning labels? A standard maintenance exosuit, the kind of thing engineers wear to fix air conditioning units. But the psychological effect was perfect. The Rigel leaders spent so much time trying to figure out what kind of terrible weapon system they were facing that they forgot why they had been fighting in the first place. Down on the ceremony floor, Reed was now surrounded by representatives from the Andromedan Trade Collective, all of them talking at once in their musical language. Their translator was working overtime to convert their complex harmonics into something resembling standard galactic common tongue. How many medals is he wearing now? Williams asked. Foster checked her data pad. 47 major decorations from 32 different worlds. His uniform jacket is running out of space. Engineering is working on a solution, but we might need to start putting medals on his back. That can't be regulation. We're in uncharted territory here. No human in history has received this level of recognition from so many different species. The uniform regulations don't cover what to do when an officer becomes a living diplomatic symbol. Williams watched as Reed politely excused himself from the Andromedan delegation and approached a group of beings he didn't recognize. They were tall, thin creatures with skin like polished metal and eyes that seemed to hold the depth of ancient stars. Who are they? The Ethereal Collective. They're requesting Reed's assistance with something they're calling the Void Walker Crisis. Our xenobiologists are still trying to understand what that means. Should I be worried? Foster was quiet for a moment. Reed's methods work, Captain. They work better than anyone expected, but they're also inspiring imitation across multiple Species. Young officers are attempting their own versions of Reed-style solutions. How's that going? Mixed results. 3 accidental wars so far, 17 diplomatic incidents, and 1 case where an entire star system had to be quarantined, after a junior officer tried to convince hostile aliens that his ship was carrying a planet-killing virus. Williams felt his blood run cold. Please tell me Reed wasn't involved in that. No, but the officer in question claimed he was following Reed's example of creative problem-solving. The hostile aliens believed the virus story and launched a preemptive strike against what they thought was a biological weapons facility. It turned out to be a civilian research station studying asteroid formation. Down below, Reed was shaking hands with various ambassadors as the ceremony wound down. His posture was straight, professional, but Williams could see something in his expression that hadn't been there 6 months ago. A weight, perhaps. The knowledge that his reputation had begun to influence events beyond his control. There's something else, Foster continued. Intelligence reports suggest that Reed's methods are being studied by hostile governments. They're trying to understand how one human can consistently achieve results that should be impossible. What have they concluded? That's the problem. They're reaching the wrong conclusions. Some species believe that Reed represents a new type of human military technology. Others think he's evidence of advanced human psychological warfare capabilities. A few are convinced that he's not human at all, but some kind of advanced artificial intelligence designed to destabilize other species. Williams watched as Reed made his way toward the exit, his uniform heavy with medals from grateful worlds. What does Reed think about all this? He's requested assignment to the most dangerous missions we can find. Says he wants to understand the limits of his methods before someone gets hurt. Someone already has gotten hurt. 3 wars, Captain. Foster nodded. Reed knows. He's also aware that his reputation has become a factor in galactic politics. Every time he solves an impossible problem, it raises the question of what humans are really capable of. Our allies are impressed, but our potential enemies are getting nervous. The ceremony hall was emptying now, with various alien delegates heading back to their ships and their homeworlds. Each carried stories of the human who could end conflicts with words, turn enemies into allies through creative thinking, and solve problems that had stumped entire civilizations. Where is Reed being assigned next? Foster checked her datapad. One more time. The Proxima system. There's been a rebellion against the colonial government. Intelligence estimates suggest that conventional military intervention would require a years-long siege to avoid massive civilian casualties. And Reed thinks he can do better? Reed thinks he needs to try. He's convinced that if his methods fail in a high-stakes situation, it's better to learn that now rather than later when the consequences might be even worse. Williams watched Reed disappear into a transport corridor, heading for his next assignment and his next impossible challenge. The young officer moved with quiet confidence, but Williams couldn't shake the feeling that Reed was walking towards something that would change everything. Admiral, what happens if Reed's methods work too well? What happens if he solves the Proxima Rebellion so completely that it changes how the galaxy thinks about human capabilities? Foster finished her cold coffee and set the cup aside. Then we'll discover whether humanity is ready for the kind of attention that comes with being seen as the species that can do the impossible. Reed's success has made him a symbol, but symbols have a way of taking on lives of their own. Outside, the station, ships from dozens of worlds were departing, carrying news of Reed's latest achievements back to their respective governments. Soon, the story would spread through the galaxy. Humanity had produced an individual who could reshape reality through sheer audacity and creative thinking. The question was not whether this would change the balance of galactic power, but how quickly those changes would spiral beyond anyone's ability to control them. Reed's next mission would provide the answer, though not in any way that anyone expected. The Proxima system burned with the light of rebellion as Lieutenant Commander Reed's ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the contested zone. What should have been a routine colonial dispute had evolved into something far more dangerous, with separatist forces controlling 3 planets and 17 space stations while holding nearly 2 million civilians hostage to prevent military intervention. Reed stood at the observation window of the diplomatic vessel Meridian, studying the tactical situation that had stumped military analysts for 8 months. His uniform bore 47 medals from 32 different worlds, each one representing a problem that conventional wisdom said couldn't be solved. The weight of them seemed heavier now, as if each success had added not just metal to his jacket, but responsibility to his shoulders. Captain Morrison approached with a grim expression and a datapad full of bad news. The situation is worse than our briefing indicated. The Separatists have taken control of the primary orbital defense grid and are threatening to destroy any ship that approaches their territory. They've also mined the hyperspace exit points, making evacuation impossible. Reed accepted the datapad and reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The Proxima Rebellion had started as a simple dispute over colonial taxation rights, but had quickly escalated when outside agitators provided the Separatists with advanced weapons and tactical support. Now the rebels controlled nearly half the system and were demanding complete independence from the Galactic Colonial Administration. What's the military assessment? Grim. Admiral Chen estimates that conventional assault would require 6 battle fleets and result in massive civilian casualties. The rebels are using civilian population centers as shields, making precision strikes impossible. Even if we could break their defenses, the process would take months and likely kill more civilians than we could save. Reed studied the tactical display, noting the positions of rebel strongholds and civilian populations. The Separatists had chosen their defensive positions carefully, ensuring that any military action would result in humanitarian disaster. What about negotiation? Morrison shook his head. The rebel leaders refused to communicate with official representatives. They claim that any attempt at negotiation is a trick designed to identify their command structure for elimination. They'll only accept complete withdrawal of all government forces and formal recognition of their independence, which the colonial administration won't grant. Correct. The Proxima system contains 17 major population centers and 3 critical manufacturing facilities. Losing control would set a precedent that could destabilize the entire colonial frontier. Reed was quiet for several minutes, studying the data and trying to understand not just what the rebels wanted, but why they believed they could achieve it. The tactical situation was indeed formidable from a military perspective, but there were patterns here that suggested the rebels might be more vulnerable than they appeared. Captain, I need to speak with our intelligence specialist. An hour later, Reed was deep in conversation with Lieutenant Torres, the Meridian's intelligence officer and the person responsible for understanding enemy psychology and motivation. Torres was a small woman with sharp eyes and the kind of analytical mind that could find patterns in chaos. The rebels aren't acting like typical separatists, she explained, highlighting sections of her analysis on the main display. Their demands are too extreme. Their tactics too sophisticated for a simple colonial uprising. Someone with advanced military training is advising them. Outside support? Almost certainly. The weapons they're using aren't available on the civilian market, and their defensive positions show knowledge of advanced siege warfare. But here's the interesting part. They're also showing signs of paranoia that goes beyond normal operational security. Reed leaned forward with interest. What kind of paranoia? They're constantly changing communication protocols, moving command centers every few hours, and implementing security measures that are actually counterproductive to their operational efficiency. It's as if they're expecting to be betrayed or infiltrated at any moment. By whom? Torres highlighted another section of her report. That's what's strange. Their security measures aren't designed to protect against government forces. They're designed to protect against something they think is much more dangerous and much more subtle. Reed studied the intelligence analysis, beginning to see the shape of a solution that was both brilliant and terrifying in its implications. Lieutenant, I need you to prepare a very specific communication for transmission on all rebel frequencies. But first, I need to coordinate with the stellar observation post at Alpha Centauri. 3 hours later, Reed was ready to implement a plan that made his previous solutions look conventional by comparison. He had spent the time coordinating with civilian research stations across 3 systems, timing his approach with precision that would make the entire operation depend on events beyond anyone's control. The key was Alpha Centauri b, a star that stellar scientists had been monitoring for the past several years as it approached the final stages of its life cycle. According to the latest observations, the star was within days of going supernova, an event that would be visible across dozens of systems and would mark the natural end of a stellar life that had burned for billions of years. Reed's plan was to convince the Proxima rebels that humanity possessed the ability to make stars explode on command. He began by opening communication channels to the rebel leadership, identifying himself not as a diplomat, but as a representative of what he called the Human Strategic Deterrent Command, a military organization that existed only in his imagination. Proxima Rebel Leadership, this is Commander Reed of the Human Strategic Deterrent Command. You are in violation of interstellar law and are ordered to surrender immediately. The response came within minutes, filled with the kind of defiant rhetoric that Reed had expected. The rebel leader, a man calling himself General Martinez, made it clear that no amount of military pressure would force the separatists to abandon their cause. Your threats are meaningless, Commander. We are prepared to defend our independence against any force you can bring against us. Our positions are impregnable, and we have the moral support of millions of oppressed colonists across the galaxy. Reed's response was calm, almost conversational. General Martinez, I am not here to threaten you with conventional military force. I am here to offer you one final opportunity to surrender, before we are forced to demonstrate why resistance to human expansion is inadvisable. What are you talking about? General, are you familiar with stellar engineering? The silence that followed suggested that Martinez was not familiar with stellar engineering, which made sense since the technology didn't exist. Reed continued, his explanation as if describing routine military equipment. Human science has developed the ability to trigger premature stellar collapse in any star within a 50 light-year radius. The process is irreversible and results in complete system sterilization. We prefer not to use such methods, but your rebellion threatens the stability of colonial space. Martinez's response carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. You're bluffing. No species has that kind of technology. General, I'm going to provide you with a demonstration. Please direct your sensors toward the Alpha Centauri system and observe what happens to Alpha Centauri b in approximately 6 hours. This will serve as proof of our capabilities. Reed closed the communication channel and contacted the Alpha Centauri observation post, requesting that they time their announcement of the star's natural supernova to coincide with his demonstration schedule. The stellar collapse had been inevitable for months, but Reed was betting that the rebels wouldn't know that. 6 hours later, Alpha Centauri b exploded in a burst of light that could be seen across dozens of systems. The supernova was a natural stellar event that astronomers had been expecting, but to the Proxima rebels, it appeared to be the result of human military technology beyond their comprehension. Reed opened communications with the rebel leadership 30 minutes after the stellar explosion. General Martinez, I trust your sensors detected the Alpha Centauri event. As you can see, human strategic deterrent capabilities are not subject to conventional military countermeasures. The response came immediately, filled with panic and disbelief. That's impossible. You can't just make stars explode. The evidence suggests otherwise, General. Now, I'm prepared to offer terms for your surrender. You have 12 hours to power down your weapons and prepare for peaceful transfer of authority. If you refuse, we will be forced to demonstrate our capabilities on Proxima Centauri itself. Reed's bluff was perfect, because it was based on an event that had actually happened. The rebels could verify that Alpha Centauri B had indeed exploded exactly when the human commander said it would. From their perspective, they were facing an enemy with godlike powers who could destroy entire star systems at will. The surrender came 8 hours later. General Martinez and his entire command structure agreed to unconditional capitulation in exchange for guaranteed safe passage and resettlement on neutral worlds. The rebellion that had resisted conventional military pressure for 8 months ended without a shot being fired. The problem was that Reed's bluff worked too well. Within days of the Proxima surrender, intelligence reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Every major military power was demanding either immediate alliance with humanity or launching preemptive strikes against what they believed were human doomsday weapons. The Andromedan Empire mobilized their entire battle fleet and demanded that humanity demonstrate its stellar destruction capabilities under controlled conditions. The Rigel Defense Coalition began evacuating their border systems, convinced that humans would use star-killing weapons to expand their territory. 3 minor species offered immediate submission to human authority rather than risk having their home stars destroyed. Most seriously, the Zephyrian Confederacy launched surprise attacks on 7 human colonies, believing that eliminating human settlements would prevent the deployment of stellar weapons against their territory. The attacks killed thousands of civilians and triggered the first interstellar war in over a century. Admiral Foster found Reed in his quarters aboard the Meridian, staring out at the stars with an expression of profound regret. His uniform jacket hung on a chair nearby, heavy with 47 medals that now seemed like accusations rather than honors. "The Galactic Council is demanding an emergency session," Foster said. "They want humanity to demonstrate these stellar weapons under international observation or face coordinated military action from a coalition of 17 different species." Reed didn't turn from the window. "How many people have died because of what I did at Proxima?" "Current casualty estimates from the Zephyrian attacks are approaching 50,000. The economic damage from military mobilizations across the galaxy is estimated in the hundreds of trillions of credits. And it's all based on a lie. Alpha Centauri B was going to explode anyway. I just took credit for a natural event that any astronomer could have predicted." Foster sat down in the chair across from where Reed stood. "The irony is that your method worked exactly as planned. You ended a rebellion without bloodshed and saved 2 million civilian lives. But the galaxy's reaction to your success threatens to destabilize everything we've built over the past century." Reed finally turned from the window. "What are my orders?" "You're being recalled to Earth for immediate consultation with the Galactic Council. They want to understand exactly what happened at Proxima and how to prevent a galaxy-wide war based on weapons that don't exist. And if the truth comes out, if everyone learns that humanity doesn't actually have stellar weapons?" Foster was quiet for a moment. "Then we'll face the combined wrath of every species that believes we've been lying to them. Some will be relieved, but others will see it as proof that humans are too dangerous to be allowed to continue spreading across the galaxy." Reed moved to his uniform jacket and began removing the medals one by one, placing them carefully in a storage container. "Admiral, I think I understand now why my methods have been so successful. It's not because I'm particularly clever or creative. It's because I've been willing to make other species believe that reality is different from what they can observe." "That's essentially correct. But what happens when you build an entire reputation on making others question reality? Eventually, the truth becomes irrelevant. What matters is what people believe the truth to be." Reed sealed the container holding his medals and handed it to Foster. "I won't be wearing these anymore. Reed, you earned every one of those decorations through actions that saved lives and prevented wars. And now they're symbols of a power that humanity doesn't possess and capabilities that exist only in other species' imaginations. Every time someone sees those medals, they're reminded that humans can supposedly make stars explode on command." Foster accepted the container with reluctance. What do you want me to tell the Galactic Council? Tell them the truth. That one human officer with too much imagination and too little sense nearly triggered a galactic war by taking credit for a natural stellar event. Tell them that humanity's greatest strategic weapon is the ability to convince enemies that we're more dangerous than we actually are. And if they demand proof that we don't have stellar weapons? Reed smiled grimly. Admiral, how exactly does one prove that they can't make stars explode? The absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Every species in the galaxy will be watching human space for signs of stellar engineering capabilities that don't exist. As Reed prepared to return to Earth for what would likely be the most important diplomatic meeting in human history, one thought dominated his mind. He had discovered that the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy was not any technology or military force, but the simple human ability to make others believe that impossible things were not only possible, but routine. The question now was whether humanity could survive being seen as the species that could reshape the very stars themselves, or whether the galaxy would decide that such dangerous beings could not be allowed to exist. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been ongoing for 3 days when Commander Reed finally entered the Great Chamber. His appearance caused an immediate stir among the assembled delegates, not because of what he wore, but because of what he conspicuously did not wear. His dress uniform was completely bare of decorations, creating an effect more unsettling than any display of military honors could have achieved. The delegate from the Zephyrian Confederacy, a tall being with crystalline features that reflected the chamber's lights like fractured rainbows, stood immediately upon Reed's arrival. Council members, we object to this human's presence without proper identification of his military achievements. How are we to assess the threat level of an individual whose capabilities are deliberately concealed? Ambassador Thrix of the Centauran Republic raised 3 of her tentacles in disagreement. Honored colleague, that is precisely the point. The absence of visible decorations has become more terrifying than their presence could ever be. We are looking at the human who convinced our intelligence services that his species could destroy stars, yet he appears before us without a single medal to indicate his true authority. Reed took his position at the center of the chamber, maintaining the calm demeanor that had served him through 3 years of impossible diplomatic situations. Around him, representatives from over 200 species watched with the careful attention of beings trying to evaluate a potential threat they could not understand. The session moderator, an ancient ethereal whose translucent form seemed to flicker between dimensions, called for order. This tribunal has been convened to address the crisis that began with the Proxima incident and has since destabilized interstellar relations across 17 sectors. Commander Reed, you will explain your actions and their consequences. Reed nodded respectfully. Honored delegates, 3 years ago, I was a junior officer assigned to routine diplomatic missions. Today, I stand before you having earned 47 major decorations from 32 different worlds, yet wearing none of them. The reason for this apparent contradiction is simple. Displaying those honors has become more dangerous than any weapon humanity has ever created. The Andromedan trade representative, a being that resembled a living constellation, flickered with patterns that their translator interpreted as skeptical inquiry. Commander, our intelligence services have confirmed that no human vessel has demonstrated stellar manipulation capabilities. Yet the Alpha Centauri event occurred exactly as you predicted. Explain this paradox. The explanation is that I lied, Reed replied without hesitation. Alpha Centauri b was scheduled to go supernova according to natural stellar evolution. I simply took credit for an event that any astronomer could have predicted months in advance. The silence that followed was profound. Several delegates began consulting their data devices, cross-referencing astronomical records and intelligence reports. The realization that they had been deceived by a simple timing coincidence rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. Zephyrian delegates' crystalline features darkened with what their species expressed as anger. You are saying that our military response to your supposed capabilities was based on deliberate misinformation? That is correct. I convinced the Proxima rebels that humanity could destroy stars on command by coordinating my threats with a natural, stellar event. The method worked perfectly to end the rebellion, but the consequences extended far beyond anything I had anticipated. Admiral Foster stepped forward from the human delegation. Honored Council, the casualty reports from the Zephyrian preemptive strikes now total 63,000 civilian deaths. Economic damage from military mobilizations across 17 sectors exceeds 2 trillion credits. All of this resulted from one human officer's ability to convince enemies that reality was different from what they could observe. The delegate from the Rigel colonies, whose scale patterns were shifting through colors that indicated deep confusion, spoke next. If humans do not possess stellar weapons, why has this individual's reputation continued to grow? Our intelligence services report that the mere presence of Commander Reed in a system causes hostile forces to withdraw without engagement, Reed answered carefully. Because my methods have been consistently successful, other species have begun to assume that human capabilities exceed what we have actually demonstrated. Each successful mission added to a reputation that has now become disconnected from reality. The ethereal moderator flickered thoughtfully. Commander, your service record indicates 47 successful resolutions of conflicts that military analysts had classified as impossible to solve without massive casualties. Yet you accomplished these victories through deception and misdirection, rather than superior technology. That is correct. In every case, I convinced opposing forces that the situation was different from what they could observe. I made pirates believe they faced overwhelming military force when I commanded a single, diplomatic vessel. I convinced rebels that they were fighting the wrong enemy while their real adversaries remained hidden. I ended the Proxima rebellion by claiming credit for a natural disaster. The chamber erupted in discussion as delegates began to understand the full implications of Reed's testimony. The human had not succeeded through advanced technology or superior firepower, but through an almost supernatural ability to make others question their own perceptions of reality. The Andromedan representatives' star patterns shifted to what the translator interpreted as profound concern. Council members, we face an unprecedented situation. This human has demonstrated that truth itself can be weaponized. If other species attempt to replicate these methods, the foundation of interstellar relations could collapse. Ambassador Thrix's tentacles coiled with anxiety. The implications extend beyond military applications. If reality can be consistently redefined through skilled communication, how can any agreement or treaty be considered reliable? Reed waited for the discussion to subside before continuing. Honored delegates, that is precisely why I have been forbidden to display my medals. Every decoration on my uniform would serve as a reminder to potential enemies that humans have repeatedly achieved impossible victories. The medals themselves have become weapons of psychological warfare. The Zephyrian delegates' features brightened with understanding. The absence of decoration creates more fear than their presence would generate. Enemies who see an undecorated human officer must assume that his achievements are too dangerous to be publicly acknowledged. Exactly. My bare uniform has become humanity's most effective deterrent. Hostile commanders routinely retreat upon learning that the human without medals is present in their operational area. They assume that anyone whose achievements cannot be safely displayed must represent capabilities beyond their ability to counter. The ethereal moderator's form stabilized as they reached a decision point. Commander Reed, this tribunal must now determine how to address the crisis your methods have created while preventing similar incidents in the future. Admiral Foster stepped forward again. Honored Council, we propose that Commander Reed continue in his current assignment, which involves being stationed at various diplomatic functions where potential enemies can observe him performing routine duties. His presence serves as a deterrent, while demonstrating that humans are not the aggressive expansionists that some believe us to be. The Rigel delegate's scales shifted to patterns indicating curiosity. "What is the nature of this assignment?" Reed smiled slightly. "I attend diplomatic receptions, drink coffee, and look bored while potential enemies observe that the supposedly most dangerous human in the galaxy spends his time on routine administrative tasks. The psychological effect has proven remarkably effective at preventing conflicts." The Andromedan constellation patterns flickered with what might have been amusement. "So your current weapon is the appearance of having no weapons at all?" "In essence, yes. Enemy intelligence services waste enormous resources trying to understand why I am not permitted to display my achievements. The more they investigate, the more convinced they become that humanity possesses capabilities that must be hidden for galactic security." The tribunal deliberated for several hours before reaching their verdict. The ethereal moderator's announcement was unprecedented in the history of interstellar law. "Commander Reed, this council finds that your methods, while effective, have created a situation that threatens the stability of galactic civilization. However, your current assignment appears to provide an acceptable solution to the crisis you created." The moderator paused, ensuring that all delegates understood the significance of the decision. "You will retain all 47 decorations, awarded by member species, but you are permanently forbidden from displaying them. Your undecorated uniform will serve as humanity's primary diplomatic tool, reminding all observers that some achievements are too dangerous to be publicly acknowledged." As the session concluded, Reed was approached by delegates from several species, who wanted to understand more about his methods. Each conversation reinforced the central irony of his situation. The more he explained that his successes were based on bluffing and misdirection, the more convinced others became that he was concealing even more dangerous capabilities. Walking through the station corridors after the tribunal, Admiral Foster found Reed sitting in an observation lounge, watching ships from across the galaxy depart for their home systems. Each vessel carried the story of the human who had been forbidden to display his medals because doing so would be too dangerous for galactic peace. "How do you feel about the Council's decision?" Foster asked. Reed was quiet for a moment, watching a Zephyrian battlecruiser maintain careful distance from a human transport. "It's probably the best outcome we could have hoped for. I keep my rank and my assignments, but my reputation now serves to prevent conflicts rather than create them." "And the medals?" "Will spend the rest of my career in a storage vault on Earth, probably the most feared collection of metal and ribbon in the galaxy." Reed turned from the window. "Admiral, I've been thinking about what happens next." "Next?" "I've already been nominated for 3 new decorations just for the effectiveness of this assignment. Military analysts from 6 different species have recommended me for honors based on my ability to end conflicts through strategic non-display of achievements." Foster stared at him. "You're receiving medals for not wearing medals?" "Apparently so." "Which creates an interesting problem. What do we do with decorations that are specifically awarded for being too dangerous to display? Do they go in the storage vault with the others, making me even more feared for having even more hidden achievements?" As they left the observation lounge, Foster realized that Reed had inadvertently created a paradox that could potentially escalate forever. Each new medal awarded for his deterrent effect would be added to the collection he was forbidden to wear, making his bare uniform even more terrifying to potential enemies, which would likely result in even more medals for his effectiveness as a deterrent. The human who had started his career by convincing pirates they faced a fleet when they saw only one ship had evolved into something unprecedented. A weapon that became more dangerous, the less dangerous it appeared to be. In a galaxy where military might was usually measured by the visible display of force, Reed had discovered that the greatest power lay in convincing others that what they could see was only the smallest hint of capabilities too terrible to reveal. As ships continued to depart from the station, carrying news of the tribunal's decision to every corner of the galaxy, one truth became clear. Humanity had produced the most feared military officer in known space, and his weapon was the simple act of appearing completely ordinary while everyone assumed he was anything but.